Former President Trump is now in Florida ahead of an historic court appearance on Tuesday. He is accused of mishandling classified documents and attempting to block the Justice Department's efforts to get them back. Over the weekend, Trump claimed he was the target of political persecution and called special counsel Jack Smith, quote, deranged. Multiple prominent Republicans have defended him in the wake of the indictment. For more on this, we're joined by Major Garrett, Scott MacFarlane, and Anthony Salvanto. Major is CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent. Scott is a CBS News Congressional Correspondent. And Anthony is CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys. Welcome to you all. I'm going to start with you, Scott. Set the scene as the former president prepares for his court appearance in Miami tomorrow.
At this moment, Nicole, the security is invisible. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, just means we can't see it. There's no barricades, no bike rack barriers, no shutting down of city streets. We expect that to change tomorrow. The courthouse behind me opens at 8:30 Eastern Time tomorrow. We're going to let several hundred people in, but only about 20 of them will be permitted to sit in the courtroom itself, where Donald Trump makes that initial appearance and faces arraignment. This will be quick. The expectation is it's one of those hearings. If you blink, you miss it. It'll happen in about 10-15 minutes time. During the initial appearance, they will introduce the parties. During the arraignment, Trump would enter his not guilty or guilty plea. All expectations is it's not guilty. To talk about release conditions, and he'll be processed by the marshals. Attorneys who practice in this court frequently tell me there's actually an underground tunnel beneath where I'm standing where they can usher a defendant, Trump included, into the marshal's office, which is elsewhere in the city, across the street in a different complex. They also could take a private room or an office in the courthouse itself and earmark it for Donald Trump to be fingerprinted, to have his booking photo taken, to be formally introduced to his pretrial services officer. But all of this, Nicole, is likely to be invisible to the public. There are no cameras allowed in federal courthouses, certainly not in the courtroom itself. And it's likely, if not possible, Trump would be escorted to a private entrance. He will not walk in the front door behind me.
And Scott, very briefly, where do things stand with the former president's legal team? We know he had a big shakeup before heading down to Miami.
He has, as his lead attorney, the same attorney, Todd Blanche, who's representing him in that Manhattan prosecution of Alvin Bragg. He's been trying to add attorneys to the team. And the clerk of courts here in Miami sent a notification to the lawyers. They have to have somebody who is barred or licensed to practice here in the Southern District of Florida, somebody who is accepted by the Florida bar and by the local court rules. There is some time to get that done before tomorrow's initial appearance, but if for some reason they couldn't get it done, they couldn't get a local attorney of record who's approved for this court, they would have to forestall the arraignment to a different day, and presumably nobody in the defense team, perhaps nobody in the security team, wants to have the former president come back again a different day and go through all this again.
And Major, of course, as this legal process plays out, so does the political process. As you know, our Bob Costas sat down with Georgia Governor Brian Kemp a short time ago. We really haven't heard him weigh in on this indictment until now. Let's take a listen.
At the end of the day, the jury will be, render the ultimate verdict on that. But look, it is concerning, but I think also it's a distraction. It's distracting from what I think people need to be focused on in the presidential race. And I also think that there's a lot of people around the country, including myself, that are concerned about the fairness issue here on the federal agencies like the FBI and the Department of Justice.
What do you make of his response?
So it's very cautious, and it is consistent with some of the caution that some Republicans have voiced having read the indictment. There was a preliminary rush by Republicans to say it's all politicized, it's a wish hunt. Then the indictment came out and people said, oh, wait a minute. This looks highly detailed, very specific, with a list of evidence that I don't think many Republicans were expecting that detail and specificity to convey. So, of course, the jury will have the ultimate verdict on this. And is it a distraction? Well, of course it's a distraction. What Republicans don't want to answer is who's to blame for that distraction. The underlying conduct of former President Trump or the Justice Department. Now, there is this larger conversation that Trump has initiated and fed relentlessly, that if not for the politicized Department of Justice, none of this would be happening. He says over and over again in fundraising emails that if he were to plead or give in, all these charges would be dropped. That's not true. These charges would not be dropped. Whether you think they should be brought in the first place is a second question, but they would not be dropped. Former President Trump is going to be prosecuted on this case. He'll have his day in court, and the politics of it are still teasing themselves out. Just a few moments ago, on Fox, Nikki Haley, former governor of South Carolina, UN ambassador in the Trump administration, said the former president, if the indictment is true, was incredibly reckless. Incredibly reckless with the handling or mishandling of classified or sensitive information. That's moving in another direction. And I think you're going to see that trend line continue for Republicans as this case plays out and the specificity of it continues to impress upon them the gravity of these charges.
Yeah, certainly strong words from Haley there. And Anthony, I want to turn to you. The former president, of course, is telling his supporters to be strong, that they're going to defeat the so-called radical left. He says he's not dropping out of the race, that he won't yield. What does your polling reveal when it comes to some of his rhetoric?
So, Nicole, first of all, context. None of these events have done anything to shake Donald Trump's status as the front runner for the Republican nomination, at least at this early stage of the 24 race. A couple of reasons for that. One is how they see this case. I'm going to point to these big numbers behind me right here. Likely GOP primary voters are not seeing this as a potential national security risk if the alleged documents have things like nuclear and military specifications in them. The rest of the country at 80% does. So that's a big difference. The other thing I want to show you, though, is connection to Donald Trump and to your question about standing strong. The Trump voter right now, like those who aren't voting for him, wants somebody who is tough in a presidential candidate. But also, look at this difference. The Trump voters much more likely to want somebody who's demanding of loyalty. Yes, not a majority, but more likely to want somebody who's entertaining. And then also, they're more likely to want someone who is combative. And that's part of the rhetoric that you described. I would add this, Nicole. When we take a look at what the electorate wants Donald Trump to talk about, well, not everybody wants him to talk about these investigations that are going on, but MAGA Republicans, more likely to his voters, his base, does want that. Whether it extends beyond that is a question we'll have to follow.
And Scott, I know that you spoke to a lot of voters over the weekend as the former president addressed them both in Georgia and North Carolina, most of them sticking with the former president for now. But I do want to play a bit of sound from former Attorney General Bill Barr. Take a listen.
If even half of it is true, then he's toast. I mean, it's a very detailed indictment, and it's very, very damning.
I mean, those are pretty strong words from the former attorney general. He probably would know better than anyone else in terms of the nature of these charges. I mean, how hard will this be for the former president to beat?
I suspect the former attorney general knew just how compelling that quote would be, that he's toast. We're looking at a criminal case that might be measured in year or years, not day, weeks, or months. Federal case takes time. This is going to go well into 2024, and they haven't precluded this going into 2025, which is why I say years. Real quickly, we did speak to a veteran criminal defense attorney here in Miami who painted a picture for what criminal defendant Donald Trump faces here tomorrow.
When you are in the custody of the marshal, you are in their custody, which means you are not free to go. So you're cuffed, you're printed, you're photographed, and you're in their custody until you are done being processed.
We will see what political impact that has, Nicole.
All right, Scott, and then Major, to you. Obviously, you know, again, that's the part of the legal process here. But in terms of politically speaking, I want to play some sound from Kari Lake, who also spoke over the weekend and remains defiant. Let's take a listen.
If you want to get to President Trump, you're going to have to go through me, and you're going to have to go through 75 million Americans just like me. Most of us are card-carrying members of the NRA.
I mean, hypothetically, even if the former president is convicted, does this still embolden him as he goes down the path towards the 2024 race?
This is a classic example of Kari Lake rhetoric, which is resembling and mimicking Donald Trump rhetoric. It's not a threat. If you parse that sentence, it's not a threat, but it leaves the implication that, remember, if this thing goes south and we're not happy, as card-carrying members of the National Rifle Association, let me be clear, there's nothing wrong about that. The implication of violence hangs over that statement. Kari Lake loves that because she knows the reaction will be, oh my God, it's a threat. It's not a threat, but it carries the implication of it. And Kari Lake is an interesting person to talk about this right now because Kari Lake is an election denier, full stop. She denies that she lost the 2020 governor's race, 2022 governor's race, which she did. She denies Trump lost the 2020 election, which he did. And that denial carries now over into whether former President Trump did anything wrong, or even questions should be raised about whether he did anything wrong. These two things run in parallel. Denialism of election reality and now denialism of legal realities. The legal jeopardy former President Trump faces is real. He will have his day in court. He will have the adversarial process at his side, as every defendant in America does. But that doesn't mean the allegations aren't serious and the implications, both legal and political, are not serious as well.
All right. Major Garrett, Anthony Salvanto, and Scott MacFarlane, thanks so much for joining us.